I'm at Health with Alex Coren, Chief Innovation Officer at Wambi, right?
Yes.
I got that right. So let's get right into it. I want to hear your story. So take us back to prior to founding Wambi. Where were you at? What were you thinking? What did you discover? Talk us through that.
Yeah. So prior to founding Wambi, I was a director of patient experience in an inpatient setting. And while I was doing that work, although I was very focused on trying to help the patients and families in every way that I could, I realized very early on in that process that I had to redirect my efforts to the people taking care of the patients, because when they were burnt out and stressed and felt like things were getting in the way of them doing their job, it didn't matter how much we invested in the patients and families, their experience was colored.
Sure. And what's your background?
So I studied neuroscience.
Okay.
So that's my background, educationally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But personally speaking, I spent a lot of time in healthcare growing up because both my parents suffered from chronic illnesses and had hospital experience as well as caregivers in the home. So got to see things from a few different sides.
Sure. So you're working there. You realize the caregivers are really a key way to influence the patient experience.
Exactly.
And then that built from just having that realization to recognizing a problem or a need?
Yeah, so I think it was realizing the fact that they are really the heart of the patient experience. That was the first step. Then the second step was identifying the fact that turnover is an epidemic in healthcare, especially for nurses. Burnout is an epidemic in healthcare. And poor morale is a huge part of what's going on, the way you're feeling when you're in a hospital setting. And so trying to understand what it was that was happening within these individuals that was causing this to take place. And so that started my sort of journey to trying to understand their perspectives and having countless conversations with individuals across the spectrum of disciplines. And what I learned was quite upsetting. And it was that they didn't feel seen or appreciated for the work that they were doing.
Sure. And did you find not having is it primary nurses that you interact with? When you say caregiver, I guess maybe give a definition.
So it started off with nurses at sort of the center of everything that we were trying to accomplish and to address. But what we learned over time was that the same things that the nurses were feeling and the solution to helping them was a solution to help others that they work with. So everyone from physicians to EVS, dietary, monitor techs, valet. It's really any individual that a patient or family member comes into contact with that makes them feel something and shapes their experience.
So basically any person that's a part of the process. And
Exactly.
I think that's an important distinction because a lot of times caregiver, you kind of fill in the blank with whatever you think of, whether that's family member or nurse, but it's really the full spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So then you found a problem at some point because I know you founded a company. So was that kind of the entry point to thinking about a company?
It wasn't like I was thinking, I just want to start a company. Let me try to figure out how to come up with an idea to start a company. It was more so I'm trying to find technology to help my organization. And I know it's needed. I could feel it in my bones. And in all the research that I did for months of trying to find something, I couldn't find anything. And it was frustrating because it was so simple.
Yeah. Why did you take on, I'm curious because I think with the purview of your job at that point, you could have simply scoped the problem to only what's in your purview, your people, your organization. Why did it go beyond that?
So what happened was we ended up building it for the organization. We rolled it out in a really small scale, just to see how things went. And we were measuring things like turnover, engagement, understanding how the morale was from just observing it. And after we rolled it out, we saw some really impressive results in the data to the point where different leaders across other organizations in the surrounding area were asking us how we were accomplishing those metrics.
Okay.
Started to create buzz.
That tipped you off. Yep.
Yes.
So then, so you got the validation. Then when did you start the company?
So had the validation, realized that the technology could be used outside of the organization. However, it wasn't built to do that. And so what happened was we ended up breaking off as a separate technology company. We rebuilt the platform from the ground up to make it scalable. Mm-hmm. And we went to market with our first client outside of the organization in 2017.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So somewhat recently, but I'm guessing a lot's happened.
A lifetime ago from my perspective.
Yep. So talk about the platform. What exactly does it do? How does it work?
Yeah. So I like to describe it as if you think about when you get out of an Uber or Lyft and you quickly provide a pulse review on your driver. And that review fuels this gamified experience for the drivers to motivate them and inspire them to deliver high quality driving for you, right? And so, I mean, that's why you trust getting in the car with a complete stranger. Before that, it wouldn't have been possible.
Right.
So you think about those principles and how it really does work. And it's just applying that to healthcare. And what we do that's really specific is we focus on the positive and positive reinforcement because we know how burnt out our team members are, right? It's horrible. And the reason makes a lot of sense. In healthcare, we always have to focus on what we're doing wrong and how to improve. And it makes sense, right? We always want to grow and improve. But what about all the things that we're doing right that nobody's talking about and no one's acknowledging?
Yep.
So it's really shining a light on those moments.
So you talk about burnout. Is that lack of positive reinforcement, is that a big factor? And what else drives that? Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of research to be done on burnout. It's a really hot topic right now. Do you feel like that's a much overlooked problem? Because you go to the conference here and you never hear talk about the people that actually work in healthcare. It's kind of surprising, right? Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are definitely places and people who are talking about it, who are very passionate about it, and it has a really negative impact. So it's being spoken about. Could it be spoken about more? Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the time is coming, which is really important. But yeah, I mean, there are a multitude of factors that go into burnout, and they're still doing the research on exactly what those indicators are and how the outcome is measured. Yeah. For example, maybe not showing up to work could be an indicator of being burned out, the turnover concept. But yeah, there's still a lot to explore. But you know it when you see it. And I'm sure you've been in that place with your role. Hopefully it's only short stretches, but you feel it when you're on that burnout path. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I don't necessarily think I've ever fully been burned out. Yeah. And I do believe I've been very lucky because I've heard stories of entrepreneurs that have, and I think that's because I have such an incredible team where when someone's up and the other person's down, they're able to lift the other person up. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I learned is it's so important to be able to count on the people around you and to admit when you're having a moment where you need someone else to be there and exactly to be open about it because we're all human and we can all help. Yeah. And I think burnout, though, when it really starts to affect companies, when it happens for a long period of time, it's not, everyone has weeks that are busy. That's not, that's not burnout. It's when it's, it's a little bit 6 months with no vacations, and then you suddenly your head's spinning 24/7. So did you pause and say, "Am I sure I want to be an entrepreneur?" Or did it seems like it just naturally progressed the way you play it back now? Yeah, I never paused and thought about it. I also never thought about the fact that was a path that was attainable. It really just naturally progressed over time, and I woke up one day, I was like, wow, I'm an entrepreneur. This really happened. I guess that's what I am. Yep. So did you, I guess going into it a little bit blind, looking back on it, is there any advice to do it that way versus do it a different way? Or my advice would be that knowing what your strengths are and also being honest about what your weaknesses are is huge because other people have strengths that can complement your weaknesses. And if you think that you have it all, it's a really quick way to become burned out and to do things that are end up being detrimental. Yeah. Did you feel like by not going deep and analyzing super deep, that was almost to your advantage? Because to some extent, it's kind of like having kids. You hear this all the time where people are like, don't think about having kids because if you think about it, the equation doesn't add up. I do think that's actually a really good point that I never thought about. I think going into this with a really fresh perspective and just being excited to tackle something,
going into healthcare was a little bit disenchanting for me because I had grown up looking up to care providers and people caring for my parents and seeing them as these heroes. And then when I was old enough to be in the system and to work in the system and to understand what's really happening behind the scenes, it was pretty disturbing. And so I had all this pent up energy where I just wanted to do something with it and to make a change. And I think if I might have been in the industry for too long, I might have been bogged down and thinking, how can you make change happen with all this red tape? It's impossible.
Right. Yeah, that's such a good point to underscore, that having the energy you have towards whatever you're aiming at, it makes all the difference in the world. I've found that in my podcast, in the company work I do. When I'm at my worst, it's when my energy's off, and it's kind of funny.
Motivating, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you'd think your strengths would come through, but it's really like your underlying mindset and emotional state that plays into it a lot. So you talk about strengths and weaknesses. What would you say? Yeah, I'm going to interview. What's your biggest weakness? No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm not asking it.
We can talk about it.
No, what skills? Because particularly an entrepreneur in healthcare, you talked about how difficult it is.
Yeah.
What skills do you think are almost a requirement to do something in healthcare?
I think there are a multitude. So I think in any product that you're bringing to market, especially in healthcare, there are so many different pieces of the puzzle that need to be perfect to get it right. Or close to perfect. No such thing as perfect. So, I mean, first and foremost, it's understanding really what the client needs, not just saying, ooh, new flashy technology, let's just throw it on them and convince them why they need it. It's the complete reverse. And I think that's why we were so lucky and became successful so quickly, because we were born within a healthcare organization. We felt the pain and we knew that we needed to solve that pain, not just throw technology. So I think understanding the needs and being able to really listen and to iterate and to not project what is needed is huge. And then the next step is to be able to communicate it effectively, simply, to continue to learn and evolve. And these can be different people doing different things, right? There's so much behind the scenes that takes place technically, implementation-wise, operationally. So it's really a combination of everyone bringing together their superpowers to make it happen.
Yeah. So how much time did you spend listening to the customer? Did that happen simply by the role you had, or did you go out of your way to make sure you involved customers as you were designing it?
Oh, yeah. So first, my entire experience working in the hospital definitely lended itself. Also, my experience as a patient family member lended itself to the big picture vision of what it could be. But then countless sessions with executives, administrators, managers, team members, patients, families, committees, and then with our original organization, and then branching out from that with all the clients we've been working with. I mean, it's incredible what they bring to the table, the ideas that they have. They get it. They feel the pulse, and it's really interesting because when we talk to our different clients across the nation, they are all saying very similar things around the same time. Yep. It's almost like there's this collective consciousness that everyone's tapping into with the pain and the solutions to address them. So really, we just act as a sounding board to listen and iterate and create. And to me, that's the funnest part of the work that we do. Yeah,
there's a kind of an unknown element, right? I think you're so mature and able to recognize that you don't have all the answers. And
definitely do not have all the answers.
I say that, but I'm surprised because I've been to a bunch of the breakout sessions and the keynotes, and the two things I realized is people point out the problem using statistics, but then there's not so much humility in how we approach it. They're like, this is going to be the latest and greatest. And I've been to enough of these conferences now that it's like every year you hear the same message and you're almost numb to it. So it's good to hear a different take on how you solve problems in healthcare. It's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, no,
I'm sure you get excited. I mean, you're obviously excited and passionate about your platform.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You have to remain in balance.
Definitely. I think, we're all in this together. And even though we all come from different perspectives, there was this amazing speaker this morning, or yesterday morning, actually. It was a panel discussion. And he talked about how, it's just all it is the temporary well caring for the temporary unwell. And when you think about it from that perspective, it makes you realize that we're all a part of the system either today, in the future, our family members. So it kind of grounds you in realizing that we have to solve this together, and to think that one company or an individual has all the answers, it doesn't
just short-sighted.
Yeah.
So let's go back then. When you're building the actual technical platform, I know you had quite a bit involved in all aspects, but particularly the wireframes and the design. Why did you take to that piece of it in particular?
It was the first step.
Okay. Simple.
So I had to get the job done.
Yeah. So did you have a background, and I guess what was your background, and how did you bridge that gap? Because I'm sure there's tons of gaps that you had to fill along the way.
It's interesting because, my background was technical in the sense that neuroscience is more technical than some other things. Even though I wasn't technically studying technology, I was raised on technology and I always had a fascination with it. But the design component kind of snuck up on me. I always loved aesthetically pleasing things. I would watch things about design, read about design. Growing up in school, I loved art, but I never considered myself an artist by any means. Yep. I always envied the artists. I was like, ooh, I wish I could be an artist, but no.
That's so funny because my thing was always acting.
Okay.
And I knew I wasn't ever going to be an actor, but then now I get to play it out a little bit
exactly.
I hit record.
When you're little, I think you have an idea of what you're going to be more than you even realize.
Yeah.
And I think there's like these classic buckets, right? An actor, an artist, a doctor, a lawyer, but the ones that are a little bit off the beaten path, you don't necessarily know exist.
Yeah.
And so when you come into yourself as you grow and mature over time, it's interesting looking back and being like, I knew that. I just didn't really know what it was.
Yeah, right. I don't have actually all the skills to be an actor, but
right.
I know the part I liked and I can recreate it somewhere else.
Exactly.
That's hilarious. So did you find, I guess, talk about some of those gaps where technical gaps, the design you said was a little bit new.
It was a lot of learning. I taught myself to front end code.
Wow.
The wireframing was all new to me, but it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I was in a privileged position because I got to understand the usability components from the end users to understand what their workflow would be and how they needed to leverage it to be successful. And then on the design side, I was just doing research, looking at tons and tons of renowned designers and their work and understanding what it was. Apple was a huge inspiration for the design of our product and our brand. And I'm really attracted to minimalist designs that are user-friendly and engaging and have a little bit of life, that aren't just like dying on the page, so to speak. So yeah, it really evolved over time. And, it's really cool to see the company grow too, because as we grow, we get to bring in experts, that
like
are not me learning on the job.
Right.
And
we'll talk about that. What was the team composition early on, and then how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, so early on, the team was comprised of people who wore many hats. So it was people who came in with so much passion for the work that we were doing and said, whatever we need to do to get the job done, we're going to figure it out. And then over time, as we started to get bigger, it was, wait a minute, we can't keep hiring people that do everything, because we need to start breaking things out into different departments and figuring out where people specialize and what they're amazing at.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been really cool to watch our team grow, and we have the most incredible team. Everyone is so in love with the work that they do and so supportive of each other, and they inspire me every single day. It's the part that I never anticipated would come from this whole journey that ended up being my favorite part.
Yeah. And talk about being a leader. You kind of have a dual responsibilities, right? Because you're a leader of people now. And that grew just kind of behind the scenes. But then you're also a leader of the application and the platform. So how do you balance that out? Do you try to focus? Do you find times you're more focused on the technology and the platform and on the people, or do they kind of go hand in hand?
I'd say there's ebbs and flows depending on what's happening. Specifically with the people, they make it so easy because they're so amazing. And I think a big piece of that is the hiring process and making sure that we bring on the right people that fit our culture, that exhibit our values truly, that our values are not just like, oh, these 5 values, you guys, they're on the job description. We appreciate them. Yeah, it's like we really grill people to make sure that they exhibit the values, because that really sets the tone for everything that we do. So I think that's a really important part that makes leading a lot easier. But that being said, it's really just trying to remove obstacles for people as they come up to be able to serve them so they can do their job and empowering them. And then on the product side, I mean, things are continuously changing and evolving, and it's just exciting. So I don't even think about it. I just want to do more and more and more.
Maybe you can play, how did the product, just get at a high level, how did the product look when you first started to where it is now?
Oh my God.
Can you even describe it in words, or is that too tough of a question?
I mean, it looked like something I would never want anyone to see in the beginning. Like, when you have your first piece of art or something from years back, it's and you're like, oh God, or like your first podcast, you're like, don't
show it to your mom, and then she's like, it's great. I love it.
Amazing. Yeah. So I would say it was like that, but we all have to start somewhere. And I think something that I'm extremely grateful for is my partner, Rebecca, who's our CEO. And one of the values that she exhibits, that's one of our company values, is fearlessness. And I'd say that when we talk about weaknesses, you made the joke, but I would say one of the things that I felt personally that I needed to work on was not being fearful of releasing the product before it was what I envisioned it to be. It was really tough because, I mean, obviously I'm noticing everything times 100 with a magnifying glass because I see every single little thing that needs to improve. And it's really hard to get out there, but without getting out there, you can't hear what matters to the people more, which is more important than what I care about. So if I was sitting in a room for years trying to get it right, we would have missed the entire boat. And Rebecca she just brings this energy of, let's go. We're going to figure it out. We're going to do it. And I mean, I think having a partner that complements you in that sense is so important. That's
awesome. Yeah, I get the luxury of listening to myself back for every podcast. Yeah. So, and I have that feeling every single time. I'm like, I shouldn't release this.
Exactly.
This is weird.
But then it's so good that you do, and so much happens. It's like when we put ourselves in a vulnerable position with good intentions, trying to impact change, even if it's uncomfortable, it really does make a difference.
Yeah. And on the other side of it is always relief, and you feel good.
Exactly.
It's just in the moment. It doesn't always feel
so
great.
Uncomfortable.
So do you think, just generally, not necessarily entrepreneurs or even anyone in healthcare, I hear you play back your story, and it almost looks like you weren't qualified to do what you've done. Do you think it's a truth that a lot of people underestimate what they're capable of?
100%.
Yeah.
I can tell you that before all of this happened, I went to a Forbes 30 Under 30 conference. And I mean, by nature of the fact of being young, first of all, is already something where you just feel insecure to be able to do things that you dream of doing, sure. Right? But Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx, she spoke, and there was something about her vulnerability and throughout her story of how she built this $1 billion company, never sold 1% of the company. And what she explained throughout her story is she never really knew all the answers, but she was determined to figure out the answers. And there was something about that really resonated with me, because I always knew I had the energy and I would do whatever it takes. I didn't care if I didn't sleep for days, if I sacrificed everything. I knew I wanted to invest my heart and soul and everything into something, and I just could never figure out what it was / have the confidence to do it. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that you don't have to have all the answers, but you have to be ready to find the answers, that was enough for me to set me off. And so I'm forever grateful to her because she gave me the strength.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I hope that if anyone listens or whoever listens to this, that they can take that with them, because it's true. You figure it out.
Yeah. And it's usually your mind's your biggest enemy in a lot of ways, because I know I'm classic overthinker and can think and think and think. And then finally I'm just like, go do something. Mm-hmm. Just break out of your shell and just go do something. I'm always so grateful so relieved and happy that I did it, but it's hard to take that initial action. So talking about the product then, I guess, I think one of the tougher parts of being a healthcare entrepreneur is you always have the business side of things, but then the purpose or the impact side of things. So how do you measure success across both of those?
Well, I think by nature of what our platform does, it's driven by the mission. So as we continue to evolve as a business, meaning continuing to expand the product based on what our clients are sharing with us and our learnings and the research and literature that comes out, it's really in line with the mission. Mm-hmm. So
They kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, like we haven't really had situations where we feel like one is.
You've had to make big trade-offs.
Exactly.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a nice place to be.
It's a good place to be. Thank you for helping me see that.
No, that's okay. Talk about the business model then. So you, talking with Bonnie, she gave us a quick rundown, but I'm interested to hear your perspective. You partner with different organizations to bring this to life?
Yeah, so different healthcare systems. I mean, the platform itself spans across inpatient, outpatient, so ambulatory, home health, home care, skilled nursing facilities. And basically the way it works is we roll it out. Again, it's a secure URL, so it's really simple. It's not heavy on the tech side for the organization. We go through a customization period where we understand their needs and how it needs to be curated for them, so to speak. And we have a workflow expert that goes in and understands how it needs to be implemented. And then we have a team that's dedicated to the implementation and ongoing engagement initiatives.
You've got this down to a process.
You have no idea. If you see the process, you have to like zoom in. But if you zoom out, it's like 3 feet long on my computer screen.
Yeah, well, that's good. So how do you go about those conversations? Because I imagine it's hard to put the problem you're trying to solve is it's hard to put your finger on the impact. And I imagine in some cases hard to make a business case for it.
So, I think that timing is everything. Early on, when we first started, it was a little bit more challenging because chief experience officers were just starting. Patient experience departments were kind of just getting up and running. But now, especially with value-based care and experience is top of mind. Turnover is an age-old problem. The HCAPs, right? I mean, these things people are talking about it. So now it's actually really not hard from an education perspective. People really get it. Specifically, the individual attribution. So with the HCAPs, the surveys that come in that have a really low response rate. And by the way, we're not in competition at all with the HCAPs. We supplement by helping them to.
What's HCAP? Just for.
So sorry. So yeah, the HCAPs are basically the Medicare CMS required survey that patients do post-discharge in order to help them determine the reimbursements that the hospital is going to get based on their satisfaction. And it's a very long survey, and it's kind of stale because it comes in months later and the response rate is somewhat low, but it's really important, right? Hospitals need to do it. And what we do is we make the data that's real-time actionable. So by collecting information in the moment in a way where you can attribute it to individuals, you can actually implement change before it's time for the patients and families to fill out the HCAPs, and therefore they can actually improve their scores. Yeah,
because some of it's incorporated in the HCAP.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. That's interesting. So is that HCAP, is that a requirement that the patient submits it? It's not.
It's not a requirement that they do it, but it's a requirement that the hospital administers it, and they need to get a certain amount. Okay. Yeah.
So where do you see Wambi going in the future? Like, what do you have next?
Oh man, everywhere. What do I have next in the future? I mean, continually developing. I mean, from my perspective, the product is everything. There's so much that we can do with the product. And from a national perspective, I mean, just continuing to expand our presence. I mean, we've been able to work with some incredible organizations and learn a lot from them, but there's still so much more to be done. And we just want to work together to solve the problems that elevate the human experience.
Awesome. So how do your role as Chief Innovation Officer, what does that entail? What type of fun stuff do you get to do?
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, all things thinking about where the product is going, so that from a big picture perspective as well as from a day-to-day perspective with the product roadmap and things on the tech side, right? So, I mean, tech is a big word.
Behemoth, yeah.
There's a lot that goes into it. And so I'm kind of bringing the pieces together and really thinking about the company's vision as a whole and where we fit into the need of the industry and our clients and being able to solve real problems that are going to change people's lives, because everything's organic, everything's living and breathing and changing. And it's really important to keep a pulse on where things are at and then to be able to stay within our mission, but to still adapt to to meet those needs.
Sure. Yeah, and that's probably not the easiest thing to stay in your mission, because I'm sure you see all sorts of new opportunities and new inefficiencies. And
it's interesting because I think in the beginning that was more of a struggle, just because, when you're pretty small, you're trying to figure out, how do I just grow, right?
Find your footing.
Yeah, but I think now that we're as established as we are, it's less about that, and it's more about seeing a huge wall of opportunities and then looking at the wall and saying, this circle right here really encompasses our mission. Let's focus on that, because there's so many things that you can do. And I think our mission is broad enough where we really can implement things that are going to make a difference and still stay within that framework.
Yep. You found your footing, and now you're trying to build on it.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So I think we've covered a lot. Is there any closing thoughts or anything that you would want to mention that maybe we didn't cover? Because I know there's so much that goes into what you do.
I would just say that for anyone who has an idea and doesn't know what to do to make it happen, the two things I would recommend are, one, stop thinking about it. Because
thank you. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, just literally stop thinking about it, because it's not going to get you anywhere at a certain point. Like, you've thought about it enough, and just figure out what the minimum people and resources you need around you to just get something off the ground, where someone, because there are other people around you who have vision, who will see where you're going with this, just enough for someone else to see it and say, all right, I get where you're going with this. Let's do it.
Yeah. I'm going to join your team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think it's so cool that kudos to you for doing it. I mean,
thank you.
2 years. I know it looks easy now, probably easier now that it's come through the other side, but I'm sure there was times where it was tough and difficult, a lot of hours, a lot of sweat.
Lots of hours.
So kudos to you. And I think
lots of lonely time.
Yeah, I'm sure all the nurses and the different caregivers that benefit from the tool are so happy that it exists.
Oh my God, that makes it all worthwhile when I get to meet a nurse or hear a story about a nurse who logs into their dashboard for the first time and sees 10 comments from patients about how incredible they are.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
And like the tears like streaming down their face, and they're like, I had no idea that I had this effect on my patients.
Right.
It's like, those are my heroes, and finally they get to see it. And I'm like, finally.
And then they do better the next day.
Exactly, because then they wake up and they have energy.
Yeah,
and they're like, I want to keep doing this because I know it's right and it feels good.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on. So if people want to get in touch with you or Wambi, what's the best way? Yeah,
so me personally, on LinkedIn, I read my messages. So you can message me on LinkedIn, Alex Coren. And also our website, Wambi, WAMBI.org. Can request any information there, reach out. We're always growing our team. So if you're interested in joining our team,
that means they're hiring.
Feel free to reach out.
She's recruiting now.
Always recruiting. I said it in the beginning. Recruiting is the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks so much for spending the time and sharing your story. Because I think
Thank you so much.
It's been really good to hear more about you. So until next time, thank you.